an amount equivalent to whatever benefits that may be extended in the future by the government to the contractor or to financial or technical assistance agreement contractors in general. F. All of the foregoing items which have not previously been offset against the government share in an earlier fiscal year, adjusted for inflation. Underscoring supplied. Section 7.80 is out of place in the FTA. It makes no sense why, for instance, money spent by the government for the benefit of the contractor in building roads leading to the mine site should still be deductible from the state's share in net mining revenues. Allowing this deduction results in benefiting the contractor twice over. It constitutes unjust enrichment on the part of the contractor at the expense of the government, since the latter is effectively being made to pay twice for the same item. 91 For being grossly disadvantageous and prejudicial to the government and contrary to public policy, Section 7.80 is undoubtedly invalid and must be declared to be without effect. Fortunately, this provision can also easily be stricken off without affecting the rest of the FTA. Nothing left over. After deductions. In connection with Section 7.8, an objection has been raised. Specified in Section 7.8 are numerous items of deduction from the state's 60% share. After taking these into account, will the state ever receive anything for its ownership of the mineral resources? We are confident that under normal circumstances, the answer will be yes. If we examine the various items of deduction listed in Section 7.8 of the WMCP FTA, we will find that they correspond closely to the components or elements of the basic government share established in DOW 9956, as discussed in the earlier part of this opinion. Likewise, the balance of the government's 60% share, after netting out the items of deduction listed in Section 7.8, corresponds closely to the additional government share provided for in DOW 9956, which, we once again stress, has nothing at all to do with indirect taxes. The Ramos de Vera Paper 92 concisely presents the fiscal contribution of an FTA under DOW 9956 in this equation. Receipts from FTA equals basic government share plus added government share. Transposed into a similar equation, the fiscal payment system from the WMCP FTA assumes the following formulation. Government 60% share in net mining revenues of WMCP equals items listed in Sec. 7.8 of the FTA plus balance of government share, payable 4 months from the end of the fiscal year. It should become apparent that the fiscal arrangement under the WMCP FTA is very similar to that under DOW 9956, with the balance of government share payable 4 months from end of fiscal year being the equivalent of the additional government share computed in accordance with the net mining revenue-based option under DOW 9956, as discussed above. As we have emphasized earlier, we find each of the 3 options for computing the additional government share, as presented in DOW 9956, to be sound and reasonable. We therefore conclude that there is nothing inherently wrong in the fiscal regime of the WMCP FTA, and certainly nothing to warrant the invalidation of the FTA in its entirety. Section 3.3 of the WMCP. FTA constitutional. Section 3.3 of the WMCP FTA is assailed for violating supposed constitutional restrictions on the term of FTAs. The provision in question reads: 3.3 This agreement shall be renewed by the government for a further period of 25 years under the same terms and conditions, providing that the contractor lodges a request for renewal with the government not less than 60 days prior to the expiry of the initial term of this agreement, and provided that the contractor is not in breach of any of the requirements of this agreement. Allegedly, the above provision runs afoul of Section 2 of Article 12 of the 1987 Constitution, which states: Sec. 2. All lands of the public domain, waters, minerals, coal, petroleum, and other mineral oils, all sources of potential energy, fisheries, forests or timber, wildlife, flora and fauna, and other natural resources are owned by the state. With the exception of agricultural lands, all other natural resources shall not be alienated. The exploration, development and utilization of natural resources shall be under the full control and supervision of the state. The state may directly undertake such activities, or it may enter into co-production, joint venture or production sharing agreements with Filipino citizens or corporations or associations at least 60% of whose capital is owned by such citizens. Such agreements may be for a period not exceeding 25 years, renewable for not more than 25 years, and under such terms and conditions as may be provided by law. In cases of water rights for irrigation, water supply, fisheries, or industrial uses other than the development of water power, beneficial use may be the measure and limit of the grant. The state shall protect the nation's marine wealth in its archipelagic waters, territorial sea, and exclusive economic zone, and reserve its use and enjoyment exclusively to Filipino citizens. The Congress may, by law, allow small-scale utilization of natural resources by Filipino citizens, as well as cooperative fish farming, with priority to subsistence fishermen and fish workers in rivers, lakes, bays and lagoons. The President may enter into agreements with foreign-owned corporations involving either technical or financial assistance for large-scale exploration, development, and utilization of minerals, petroleum, and other mineral oils according to the general terms and conditions provided by law, based on real contributions to the economic growth and general welfare of the country. In such agreements, the state shall promote the development and use of local scientific and technical resources. The President shall notify the Congress of every contract entered into in accordance with this provision, within 30 days from its execution. 93. We hold that the term limitation of 25 years does not apply to FTAs. The reason is that the above provision is found within paragraph 1 of section 2 of Article 12, which refers to mineral agreements, co-production agreements, joint venture agreements and mineral production sharing agreements, which the government may enter into with Filipino citizens and corporations, at least 60% owned by Filipino citizens. The word such clearly refers to these three mineral agreements, CPAs, JVAs and MPSAs, not to FTAs. Specifically, FTAs are covered by paragraphs 4 and 5 of Section 2 of Article 12 of the Constitution. It will be noted that there are no term limitations provided for in the said paragraphs dealing with FTAs. This shows that FTAs are sui generis, in a class of their own. This omission was obviously a deliberate move on the part of the framers. They probably realized that FTAs would be different in many ways from MPSAs, JVAs and CPAs. The reason the framers did not fix term limitations applicable to FTAs is that they preferred to leave the matter to the discretion of the legislature and or the agencies involved in implementing the laws pertaining to FTAs, in order to give the latter enough flexibility and elbow room to meet changing circumstances. Note also that, as previously stated, the exploratory phases of an FTA lasts up to 11 years. Thereafter, a few more years would be gobbled up in startup operations. It may take 15 years before an FTA contractor can start earning profits. And thus, the period of 25 years may really be short for an FTA. Consider too that in this kind of agreement, the contractor assumes all entrepreneurial risks. If no commercial quantities of minerals are found, the contractor bears all financial losses. To compensate for this long gestation period and extra business risks, it would not be totally unreasonable to allow it to continue edu activities for another 25 years. In any event, the complaint is that, in essence, Section 3.3 gives the contractor the power to compel the government to renew the WMCP FTA for another 25 years and deprives the state of any say on whether to renew the contract. While we agree that Section 3.3 could have been worded so as to prevent it from favoring the contractor, this provision does not violate any constitutional limits, since the said term limitation does not apply at all to FTAs. Neither can the provision be deemed in any manner to be illegal, as no law is being violated thereby. It is certainly not illegal for the government to waive its option to refuse the renewal of commercial contract. Verily, the government did not have to agree to Section 3.3. It could have said no to the stipulation, but it did not. It appears that, in the process of negotiations, the other contracting party was able to convince the government to agree to the renewal terms. Under the circumstances, it does not seem proper for this court to intervene and step in to undo what might have perhaps been a possible miscalculation on the part of the state. If government believes that it is or will be aggrieved by the effects of Section 3.3, the remedy is the renegotiation of the provision in order to provide the state the option to not renew the FTA. Financial benefits for foreigners. Not forbidden by the Constitution. Before leaving this subject matter, we find it necessary for us to rid ourselves of the false belief that the Constitution somehow forbids foreign-owned corporations from deriving financial benefits from the development of our natural or mineral resources. The Constitution has never prohibited foreign corporations from acquiring and enjoying beneficial interest in the development of Philippine natural resources. The state itself need not directly undertake exploration, development, and utilization activities. Alternatively, the Constitution authorizes the government to enter into joint venture agreements, JVAs, co-production agreements, CPAs, and mineral production sharing agreements, MPSAs, with contractors who are Filipino citizens or corporations that are at least 60% Filipino-owned. They may do the actual dirty work, the mining operations. In the case of a 60% Filipino-owned corporation, the 40% individual and or corporate non-Filipino stakeholders obviously participate in the beneficial interest derived from the development and utilization of our natural resources. They may receive by way of dividends, up to 40% of the contractor's earnings from the mining project. Likewise, they may have a say in the decisions of the board of directors, since they are entitled to representation therein to the extent of their equity participation, which the Constitution permits to be up to 40% of the contractor's equity. Hence, the non-Filipino stakeholders may in that manner also participate in the management of the contractor's natural resource development work. All of this is permitted by our Constitution, for any natural resource, and without limitation even in regard to the magnitude of the mining project or operations, see paragraph 1 of Section 2 of Article 12. It is clear, then, that there is nothing inherently wrong with or constitutionally objectionable about the idea of foreign individuals and entities having or enjoying beneficial interest in, and participating in the management of operations relative to, the exploration, development and utilization of our natural resources. To more advantageous than other schemes, like CPA, JVA and MPSA. A final point on the subject of beneficial interest. We believe the FTA is a more advantageous proposition for the government as compared with other agreements permitted by the Constitution. In a CPA that the government enters into with one or more contractors, the government shall provide inputs to the mining operations other than the mineral resource itself. 94. In a JVA, a JV company is organized by the government and the contractor, with both parties having equity shares, investments, and the contractor is granted the exclusive right to conduct mining operations and to extract minerals found in the area. 95. On the other hand, in an MPSA, the government grants the contractor the exclusive right to conduct mining operations within the contract area and shares in the gross output, and the contractor provides the necessary financing, technology, management and manpower. The point being made here is that, in two of the three types of agreements under consideration, the government has to ante up some risk capital for the enterprise. In other words, government funds, public monies, are withdrawn from other possible uses, put to work in the venture and placed at risk in case the venture fails. This notwithstanding, management and control of the operations of the enterprise are, in all three arrangements, in the hands of the contractor, with the government being mainly a silent partner. The three types of agreement mentioned above apply to any natural resource, without limitation and regardless of the size or magnitude of the project or operations. In contrast to the foregoing arrangements, and pursuant to paragraph 4 of Section 2 of Article 12, the FTA is limited to large-scale projects and only for minerals, petroleum and other mineral oils. Here, the Constitution removes the 40% cap on foreign ownership and allows the foreign corporation to own up to 100% of the equity. Filipino capital may not be sufficient on account of the size of the project, so the foreign entity may have to ante up all the risk capital. Cumulatively, the foreign stakeholder bears up to 100% of the risk of loss if the project fails. In respect of the particular Ftagrana WMCP, then 100% foreign-owned, was responsible, as contractor, for providing the entire equity, including all the inputs for the project. It was to bear 100% of the risk of loss if the project failed, but its maximum potential beneficial interest consisted only of 40% of the net beneficial interest, because the other 60% is the share of the government, which will never be exposed to any risk of loss whatsoever. In consonance with the degree of risk assumed, the FTO vested in WMCP the day-to-day management of the mining operations. Still, such management is subject to the overall control and supervision of the state in terms of regular reporting, approvals of work programs and budgets, and so on. So, one needs to consider in relative terms, the costs of inputs for, degree of risk attendant to, and benefits derived or to be derived from a CPA, a JVA or an MPSA vis-à-vis those pertaining to ENFTA. It may not be realistically asserted that the foreign grantee of ENFTA is being unduly favored or benefited as compared with a foreign stakeholder in a corporation holding a CPA, a JVA or an MPSA. Seen the other way around, the government is definitely better off with ENFTA than a CPA, a JVA or an MPSA. Developmental policy on the mining industry. During the oral argument and in their final memorandum, petitioners repeatedly urged the court to consider whether mining as an industry and economic activity deserve to be accorded priority, preference and government support as against, say, agriculture and other activities in which Filipinos in the Philippines may have an economic advantage. For instance, a recent U.S. study 96 reportedly examined the economic performance of all local U.S. counties that were dependent on mining and 20% of whose labor earnings between 1970 and 2000 came from mining enterprises. The study, covering 100 U.S. counties in 25 states dependent on mining, showed that per capita income grew about 30% less in mining-dependent communities in the 1980s and 25% less for the entire period 1980 to 2000. The level of per capita income was also lower. Therefore, given the slower rate of growth, the gap between these and other local counties increased. Petitioners invite attention to the Oxfam America report's warning to developing nations that mining brings with it serious economic problems, including increased regional inequality, unemployment and poverty. They also cite the final report 97 of the Extractive Industries Review Project commissioned by the World Bank, the WBR report, which warns of environmental degradation, social disruption, conflict, and uneven sharing of benefits with local communities that bear the negative social and environmental impact. The report suggests that countries need to decide on the best way to exploit their natural resources, in order to maximize the value added from the development of their resources and ensure that they are on the path to sustainable development once the resources run out. Whatever priority or preference may be given to mining vis-à-vis other economic or non-economic activities is a question of policy that the President and Congress will have to address. It is not for this court to decide. This court declares what the Constitution and the laws say, interprets only when necessary, and refrains from delving into matters of policy. Suffice it to say that the state control accorded by the Constitution over mining activities assures a proper balancing of interests. More pointedly, such control will enable the President to demand the best mining practices and the use of the best available technologies to protect the environment and to rehabilitate mined-out areas. Indeed, under the mining law, the government can ensure the protection of the environment during and after mining. It can likewise provide for the mechanisms to protect the rights of indigenous communities, and thereby mold a more socially responsive, culturally sensitive and sustainable mining industry. Early on during the launching of the Presidential Mineral Industry Environmental Awards on February 6, 1997, then-President Fidel V. Ramos captured the essence of balanced and sustainable mining in these words. Long-term, High-profit mining translates into higher revenues for government, more decent jobs for the population, more raw materials to feed the engines of downstream and allied industries, and improved chances of human resource and countryside development by creating self-reliant communities away from urban centers. XXXXXXXXX. Against a fragile and finite environment, it is sustainability that holds the key. In sustainable mining, we take a middle ground where both production and protection goals are balanced, and where parties in interest come to terms. Neither has the present leadership been remiss in addressing the concerns of sustainable mining operations. Recently, on January 16, 2004 and April 20, 2004, President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo issued Executive Orders Nos. 270 and 270A, respectively, to promote responsible mineral resources exploration, development and utilization, in order to enhance economic growth, in a manner that adheres to the principles of sustainable development and with due regard for justice and equity, sensitivity to the culture of the Filipino people and respect for Philippine sovereignty. 98. Refutation of dissents. The court will now take up a number of other specific points raised in the dissents of Justices Carpio and Morales. 1. Justice Morales introduced us to Hugh Morgan, former President and Chief Executive Officer of Western Mining Corporation, WMC, and former President of the Australian Mining Industry Council, who spearheaded a vociferous opposition to the filing by Aboriginal peoples of native title claims against mining companies in Australia in the aftermath of the landmark Mabo decision by the Australian High Court. According to sources quoted by our esteemed colleague, Morgan was also a racist and a bigot. In the course of protesting Mabo, Morgan allegedly uttered derogatory remarks belittling the Aboriginal culture and race. An unwritten caveat of this introduction is that this court should be careful not to permit the entry of the likes of Hugh Morgan and his hordes of alleged racist bigots at WMC. With all due respect, such scare tactics should have no place in the discussion of this case. We are deliberating on the constitutionality of Raw 7942, Dow 9640 and the FTA originally granted to WMCP, which had been transferred to Sagittarius Mining, a Filipino corporation. We are not discussing the apparition of white Anglo-Saxon racists, bigots massing at our gates. 2. On the proper interpretation of the phrase agreements involving either technical or financial assistance, Justice Morales points out that at times we conveniently omitted the use of the disjunctive either or, which according to her denotes restriction, hence the phrase must be deemed to connote restriction and limitation. But, as Justice Carpio himself pointed out during the oral argument, that disjunctive phrase either technical or financial assistance would, strictly speaking, literally mean that a foreign contractor may provide only one or the other, but not both. And if both technical and financial assistance were required for a project, the state would have to deal with at least two different foreign contractors, one for financial and the other for technical assistance. And following on that, a foreign contractor, though very much qualified to provide both kinds of assistance, would nevertheless be prohibited from providing one kind as soon as it shall have agreed to provide the other. But if the court should follow this restrictive and literal construction, can we really find two, or more, contractors who are willing to participate in one single project, one to provide the financial assistance only and the other the technical assistance exclusively? It would be excellent if these two or more contractors happen to be willing and are able to cooperate and work closely together on the same project, even if they are otherwise competitors. And it would be superb if no conflicts would arise between or among them in the entire course of the contract. But what are the chances things will turn out this way in the real world? To think that the framers deliberately imposed this kind of restriction is to say that they were either exceedingly optimistic, or incredibly naive. This begs the question, what laudable objective or purpose could possibly be served by such strict and restrictive literal interpretation? 3. Citing Apposa v. Vactran Jr., Justice Morales claims that a service contract is not a contract or property right which merits protection by the Due Process Clause of the Constitution, but merely a license or privilege which may be validly revoked, rescinded or withdrawn by executive action whenever dictated by public interest or public welfare. Opposes cites Dan V. Director of Forestry and Ismail V. Deputy Executive Secretary as authority. The latter cases dealt specifically with timber licenses only. Oppose allegedly reiterated that a license is merely a permit or privilege to do what otherwise would be unlawful, and is not a contract between the authority, federal, state or municipal, granting it and the person to whom it is granted. Neither is it property or a property right, nor does it create a vested right, nor is it taxation. Thus this court held that the granting of license does not create irrevocable rights, neither is it property or property rights. Should oppose be deemed applicable to the case at bar, on the argument that natural resources are also involved in this situation? We do not think so. A grantee of a timber license, permit or license agreement gets to cut the timber already growing on the surface. It need not dig up tons of earth to get at the logs. In a logging concession, the investment of the licensee is not as substantial as the investment of a large-scale mining contractor. If a timber license were revoked, the licensee packs up its gear and moves to a new area applied for, and starts over. What it leaves behind are mainly the trails leading to the logging site. In contrast, the mining contractor will have sunk a great deal of money, tens of millions of dollars, into the ground, so to speak, for exploration activities, for development of the mine site and infrastructure, and for the actual excavation and extraction of minerals, including the extensive tunneling work to reach the ore body. The cancellation of the mining contract will utterly deprive the contractor of its investments, that is, prevent recovery of investments, most of which cannot be pulled out. To say that an FTAP is just like a mere timber license or permit and does not involve contract or property rights which merit protection by the Due Process Clause of the Constitution, and may therefore be revoked or cancelled in the blink of an eye, is to adopt the well-nigh confiscatory stance. At the very least, it is downright dismissive of the property rights of business persons and corporate entities that have investments in the mining industry, whose investments, operations and expenditures do contribute to the general welfare of the people, the coffers of government, and the strength of the economy. Such a pronouncement will surely discourage investments, local and foreign, which are critically needed to fuel the engine of economic growth and move this country out of the rut of poverty. In sum, OPPOSA is not applicable. 4. Justice Morales adverts to the supposedly clear intention of the framers of the Constitution to reserve our natural resources exclusively for the Filipino people. She then quoted from the records of the CONCOM deliberations a passage in which then-Commissioner David explained his vote, arguing in the process that aliens ought not be allowed to participate in the enjoyment of our natural resources. One passage does not suffice to capture the tenor or substance of the entire extensive deliberations of the commissioners, or to reveal the clear intention of the framers as a group. A rereading of the entire deliberations, quoted here earlier, is necessary if we are to understand the true intent of the framers. 5. Since 1935, the Filipino people, through their constitution, have decided that the retardation or delay in the exploration, development or utilization of the nation's natural resources is merely secondary to the protection and preservation of their ownership of the natural resources, so says Justice Morales, citing Erugo. If it is true that the framers of the 1987 Constitution did not care much about alleviating the retardation or delay in the development and utilization of our natural resources, why did they bother to write paragraph 4 at all? Were they merely paying lip service to large-scale exploration, development and utilization? They could have just completely ignored the subject matter and left it to be dealt with through a future constitutional amendment. But we have to harmonize every part of the Constitution and to interpret each provision in a manner that would give life and meaning to it and to the rest of the provisions. It is obvious that a literal interpretation of paragraph 4 will render it totally inutile and inoperative. 6. According to Justice Morales, the deliberations of the Constitutional Commission do not support our contention that the framers, by specifying such agreements involving financial or technical assistance, necessarily gave implied assent to everything that these agreements implicitly entailed, or that could reasonably be deemed necessary to make them tenable and effective, including management authority in the day-to-day operations. As proof thereof, she quotes one single passage from the CONCOM deliberations, consisting of an exchange among Commissioners Tingson, Garcia, and Monsad. However, the quoted exchange does not serve to contradict our argument, it even bolsters it. Christian Monsad was quoted as saying, 30 I think we have to make a distinction that it is not really realistic to say that we will borrow on our own terms. Maybe we can say that we inherited unjust loans, and we would like to repay these on terms that are not prejudicial to our own growth. But the general statement that we should only borrow on our own terms is a bit unrealistic. Monsad is one who knew whereof he spoke. 7. Justice Morales also declares that the optimal time for the conversion of INTA into an MPSA is after completion of the exploration phase and just before undertaking the development and construction phase, on account of the fact that the requirement for a minimum investment of $50 million is applicable only during the development, construction and utilization phase, but not during the exploration phase, when the foreign contractor need merely comply with minimum ground expenditures. Thus, by converting, the foreign contractor maximizes its profits by avoiding its obligation to make the minimum investment of $50 million. This argument forgets that the foreign contractor is in the game precisely to make money. In order to come anywhere near profitability, the contractor must first extract and sell the mineral ore. In order to do that, it must also develop and construct the mining facilities, set up its machineries and equipment and dig the tunnels to get to the deposit. The contractor is thus compelled to expend funds in order to make profits. If it decides to cut back on investments and expenditures, it will necessarily sacrifice the pace of development and utilization, it will necessarily sacrifice the amount of profits it can make from the mining operations. In fact, at certain less than optimal levels of operation, the stream of revenues generated may not even be enough to cover variable expenses, let alone overhead expenses. This is a dismal situation anyone would want to avoid. In order to make money, one has to spend money. This truism applies to the mining industry as well. 8. Mortgaging the minerals to secure foreign tech contractors' obligations is anomalous, according to Justice Morales, since the contractor was from the beginning obliged to provide all financing needed for the mining operations. However, the mortgaging of minerals by the contractor does not necessarily signify that the contractor is unable to provide all financing required for the project, or that it does not have the financial capability to undertake large-scale operations. Mortgaging of mineral products, just like the assignment, by way of security, of manufactured goods and goods in inventory, and the assignment of receivables, is an ordinary requirement of banks, even in the case of clients with more than sufficient financial resources. And nowadays, even the richest and best managed corporations make use of bank credit facilities. It does not necessarily signify that they do not have the financial resources or are unable to provide the financing on their own. It is just a matter of maximizing the use of their funds. 9. Does the contractor in reality acquire the surface rights for free, by virtue of the fact that it is entitled to reimbursement for the costs of acquisition and maintenance, adjusted for inflation? We think not. The reimbursement is possible only at the end of the term of the contract, when the surface rights will no longer be needed, and the land previously acquired will have to be disposed of, in which case the contractor gets reimbursement from the sales proceeds. The contractor has to pay out the acquisition price for the land. That money will belong to the seller of the land. Only if and when the land is finally sold off will the contractor get any reimbursement. In other words, the contractor will have been cash out for the entire duration of the term of the contract, 25 or 50 years, depending. If we calculate the cost of money at say 12% per annum, that is the cost or opportunity lost to the contractor, in addition to the amount of the acquisition price. 12% per annum for 50 years is 600%, this, without any compounding yet. The cost of money is therefore at least 600% of the original acquisition cost. It is in addition to the acquisition cost. For free? Not by a long shot. 10. The contractor will acquire and hold up to 5,000 hectares? We doubt it. The acquisition by the state of land for the contractor is just to enable the contractor to establish its mine site, build its facilities, establish a tailings pond, set up its machinery and equipment, and dig mine shafts and tunnels, etc. It is impossible that the surface requirement will aggregate 5,000 hectares. Much of the operations will consist of the tunneling and digging underground, which will not require possessing or using any land surface. 5,000 hectares is way too much for the needs of a mining operator. It simply will not spend its cash to acquire property that it will not need. The cash may be better employed for the actual mining operations, to yield a profit. 11. Justice Carpio claims that the phrase "among other things," found in the second paragraph of Section 81 of the Mining Act, is being incorrectly treated as a delegation of legislative power to the then Secretary to issue Down 9956 and prescribe the formulae therein on the state's share from mining operations. He adds that the phrase "among other things" was not intended as a delegation of legislative power to the then Secretary, much less could it be deemed a valid delegation of legislative power, since there is nothing in the second paragraph of Section 81 which can be said to grant any delegated legislative power to the then Secretary. And even if there were, such delegation would be void, for lack of any standards by which the delegated power shall be exercised. While there is nothing in the second paragraph of Section 81 which can directly be construed as a delegation of legislative power to the then Secretary, it does not mean that Down 9956 is invalid per se, or that the Secretary acted without any authority or jurisdiction in issuing Down 9956. As we stated earlier in our prologue, who or what organ of government actually exercises this power of control on behalf of the state? The Constitution is crystal clear: the President. Indeed, the Chief Executive is the official constitutionally mandated to enter into agreements with foreign-owned corporations. On the other hand, Congress may review the action of the President once it is notified of every contract entered into in accordance with this constitutional provision within 30 days from its execution. It is the President who is constitutionally mandated to enter into FTAs with foreign corporations, and in doing so, it is within the President's prerogative to specify certain terms and conditions of the FTAs, for example, the fiscal regime of FTAs, that is, the sharing of the net mining revenues between the contractor and the state. Being the President's alter ego with respect to the control and supervision of the mining industry, the then Secretary, acting for the President, is necessarily clothed with the requisite authority and power to draw up guidelines delineating certain terms and conditions, and specifying therein the terms of sharing of benefits from mining, to be applicable to FTAs in general. It is important to remember that Down 9956 has been in existence for almost 6 years, and has not been amended or revoked by the President. The issuance of Down 9956 did not involve the exercise of delegated legislative power. The legislature did not delegate the power to determine the nature, extent and composition of the items that would come under the phrase "among other things." The legislature's power pertains to the imposition of taxes, duties and fees. This power was not delegated to the then Secretary. But the power to negotiate and enter into FTAs was withheld from Congress, and reserved for the President. In determining the sharing of mining benefits, that is, in specifying what the phrase "among other things" include, the President, through the Secretary acting in her behalf, was not determining the amount or rate of taxes, duties and fees, but rather the amount of income to be derived from minerals to be extracted and sold, income which belongs to the state as owner of the mineral resources. We may say that, in the second paragraph of Section 81, the legislature in a sense intruded partially into the President's sphere of authority when the former providing that the government share in financial or technical assistance agreement shall consist of, among other things, the contractor's corporate income tax, excise tax, special allowance, withholding tax due from the contractor's foreign stockholders arising from dividend or interest payments to the said foreign stockholder in case of a foreign national, and all such other taxes, duties and fees as provided for under existing laws. Italics supplied. But it did not usurp the President's authority, since the provision merely included the enumerated items as part of the government share, without foreclosing or in any way preventing, as in fact Congress could not validly prevent, the President from determining what constitutes the state's compensation derived from FTAs. In this case, the President in effect directed the inclusion or addition of other things, viz., income for the owner of the resources, in the government's share, while adopting the items enumerated by Congress as part of the government share also. 12. Justice Carpio's insistence on applying the justem generis rule of statutory construction to the phrase "among other things" is therefore useless, and must fall by the wayside. There is no point trying to construe that phrase in relation to the enumeration of taxes, duties and fees found in paragraph 2 of section 81, precisely because the constitutional power to prescribe the sharing of mining income between the state or in mining companies, to quote Justice Carpio pursuant to NFTA, is constitutionally lodged with the President, not with Congress. It thus makes no sense to persist in giving the phrase "among other things" a restricted meaning referring only to taxes, duties and fees. 13. Strangely, Justice Carpio claims that the DENRA Secretary can change the formula in DOW 9956 anytime, even without the approval of the President, and the Secretary is the sole authority to determine the amount of consideration that the state shall receive in NFTA, because Section 5 of the DOW states that any amendment of NFTA other than the provision on fiscal regime shall require the negotiation with the negotiation panel and the recommendation of the Secretary for approval of the President. 30. Allegedly, because of that provision, if an amendment in the FTA involves non-fiscal matters, the amendment requires approval of the President, but if the amendment involves a change in the fiscal regime, the DENRA Secretary has the final authority, and approval of the President may be dispensed with, hence the Secretary is more powerful than the President. We believe there is some distortion resulting from the quoted provision being taken out of context. Section 5 of DOW 9956 reads as follows. Section 5. Status of existing FTAs. All FTAs approved prior to the effectivity of this administrative order shall remain valid and be recognized by the government, provided that should a contractor desire to amend its FTA, it shall do so by filing a letter of intent, LOI, to the Secretary through the Director. Provided, further, that if the contractor desires to amend the fiscal regime of its FTA, it may do so by seeking for the amendment of its FTA's whole fiscal regime by adopting the fiscal regime provided hereof, provided, finally, that any amendment of an FTA other than the provision on fiscal regime shall require the negotiation with the negotiating panel and the recommendation of the Secretary for approval of the President of the Republic of the Philippines. Underscoring supplied. It looks like another case of misapprehension. The proviso being objected to by Justice Carpio is actually preceded by a phrase that requires a contractor desiring to amend the fiscal regime of its FTA, to amend the same by adopting the fiscal regime prescribed in DOW 9956, that is, solely in that manner, and in no other. Obviously, since DOW 9956 was issued by the Secretary under the authority and with the presumed approval of the President, the amendment of an FTA by merely adopting the fiscal regime prescribed in said DOW 9956, and nothing more, need not have the express clearance of the President anymore. It is as if the same had been pre-approved. We cannot fathom the complaint that makes the Secretary more powerful than the President, or that the former is trying to hide things from the President or Congress. 14. Based on the first sentence of Section 5 of DOW 9956, which states, "All FTAs approved prior to the effectivity of this administrative order shall remain valid and be recognized by the government," Justice Carpio concludes that said administrative order allegedly exempts FTAs approved prior to its effectivity, like the WMCP FTA, from having to pay the state any share from their mining income, apart from taxes, duties and fees. We disagree. What we see in black and white is the statement that the FTAs approved before the DAO came into effect are to continue to be valid and will be recognized by the state. Nothing is said about their fiscal regimes. Certainly, there is no basis to claim that the contractors under said FTAs were being exempted from paying the government a share in their mining incomes. For the record, the WMCP FTA is not and has never been exempt from paying the government share. The WMCP FTA has its own fiscal regime, Section 7.7, which gives the government a 60% share in the net mining revenues of WMCP from the commencement of commercial production. For that very reason, we have never said that DAO 9956 is the basis for claiming that the WMCP FTA has a consideration. Hence, we find quite out of place Justice Carpio's statement that ironically, DAO 9956, the very authority cited to support the claim that the WMCP FTA has a consideration, does not apply to the WMCP FTA. By its own express terms, DAO 9956 does not apply to FTAs executed before the issuance of DAO 9956, like the WMCP FTA. The majority's position has allegedly no leg to stand on since even DAO 9956, assuming it is valid, cannot save the WMCP FTA from want of consideration. Even assuming arguendo that DAO 9956 does not apply to the WMCP FTA, nevertheless, the WMCP FTA has its own fiscal regime, found in Section 7.7 thereof. Hence, there is no such thing as want of consideration here. Still more startling is this claim. The majority supposedly agrees that the provisions of the WMCP FTA, which grant a sham consideration to the state, are void? Since the majority agrees that the WMCP FTA has a sham consideration, the WMCP FTA thus lacks the third element of a valid contract. The decision should declare the WMCP FTA void for want of consideration unless it treats the contract as an MPSA under Section 80. Indeed, the only recourse of WMCP to save the validity of its contract is to convert it into an MPSA. To clarify, we said that Sections 7.9 and 7.8 of the WMCP FTA are provisions grossly disadvantageous to government and detrimental to the interests of the Filipino people, as well as violative of public policy, and must therefore be stricken off as invalid. Since the offending provisions are very much separable from Section 7.7 and the rest of the FTA, the deletion of Sections 7.9 and 7.8 can be done without affecting or requiring the invalidation of the WMCP FTA itself, and such deletion will reserve for government its due share of the 60% benefits. Therefore, the WMCP FTA is not bereft of a valid consideration, assuming for the nonce that indeed this is the consideration of the FTA. Summation. To conclude, a summary of the key points discussed above is now in order. The meaning of agreements involving either technical or financial assistance. Applying familiar principles of constitutional construction to the phrase agreements involving either technical or financial assistance. The framer's choice of words does not indicate the intent to exclude other modes of assistance, but rather implies that there are other things being included or possibly being made part of the agreement, apart from financial or technical assistance. The drafters avoided the use of restrictive and stringent phraseology. A verbal legis scrutiny of Section 2 of Article 12 of the Constitution discloses not even a hint of a desire to prohibit foreign involvement in the management or operation of mining activities, or to eradicate service contracts. Such moves would necessarily imply an underlying drastic shift in fundamental economic and developmental policies of the state. That change requires a much more definite and irrefutable basis than mere omission of the word service contract from the new Constitution. Furthermore, a literal and restrictive interpretation of this paragraph leads to logical inconsistencies. A constitutional provision specifically allowing foreign-owned corporations to render financial or technical assistance in respect of mining or any other commercial activity was clearly unnecessary. The provision was meant to refer to more than mere financial or technical assistance. Also, if paragraph 4 permits only agreements for financial or technical assistance, there would be no point in requiring that they be based on real contributions to the economic growth and general welfare of the country. And considering that there were various long-term service contracts still in force and effect at the time the new charter was being drafted, the absence of any transitory provisions to govern the termination and closing out of the then existing service contracts strongly militates against the theory that the mere omission of service contracts signaled their prohibition by the new constitution. Resort to the deliberations of the Constitutional Commission is therefore unavoidable, and a careful scrutiny thereof conclusively shows that the CONCOM members discussed agreements involving either technical or financial assistance in the same sense as service contracts and used the terms interchangeably. The drafters in fact knew that the agreements with foreign corporations were going to entail not mere technical or financial assistance but, rather, foreign investment and management of an enterprise for large-scale exploration, development and utilization of minerals. The framers spoke about service contracts as the concept was understood in the 1973 Constitution. It is obvious from their discussions that they did not intend to ban or eradicate service contracts. Instead, they were intent on crafting provisions to put in place safeguards that would eliminate or minimize the abuses prevalent during the martial law regime. In brief, they were going to permit service contracts with foreign corporations as contractors, but with safety measures to prevent abuses, as an exception to the general norm established in the first paragraph of Section 2 of Article 12, which reserves or limits to Filipino citizens and corporations at least 60% owned by such citizens the exploration, development and utilization of mineral or petroleum resources. This was prompted by the perceived insufficiency of Filipino capital and the felt need for foreign expertise in the use of mineral resources. Despite strong opposition from some CONCOM members during the final voting, the article on the national economy and patrimony, including paragraph 4 allowing service contracts with foreign corporations as an exception to the general norm in paragraph 1 of Section 2 of the same article, was resoundingly and overwhelmingly approved. The drafters, many of whom were economists, academicians, lawyers, businesspersons and politicians knew that foreign entities will not enter into agreements involving assistance without requiring measures of protection to ensure the success of the venture and repayment of their investments, loans and other financial assistance, and ultimately to protect the business reputation of the foreign corporations. The drafters, by specifying such agreements involving assistance, necessarily gave implied assent to everything that these agreements entailed or that could reasonably be deemed necessary to make them tenable and effective, including management authority with respect to the day-to-day operations of the enterprise, and measures for the protection of the interests of the foreign corporation, at least to the extent that they are consistent with Philippine sovereignty over natural resources, the constitutional requirement of state control, and beneficial ownership of natural resources remaining vested in the state. From the foregoing, it is clear that agreements involving either technical or financial assistance referred to in paragraph 4 are in fact service contracts, but such new service contracts are between foreign corporations acting as contractors on the one hand, and on the other hand government as principal or owner of the works, whereby the foreign contractor provides the capital, technology and technical know-how, and managerial expertise in the creation and operation of the large-scale mining, extractive enterprise, and government through its agencies, then MGB, actively exercises full control and supervision over the entire enterprise.